I'm Steve Johnson, News Director for theDove TV. Check out our other videos and visit our website at thedove.us. Thanks.
Welcome back, and coming up in just a moment, we're going to have Toby Harnden with us. He is the author of Dead Men Rising, an epic story of war and heroism in Afghanistan. So we'll be talking to him about his book coming up in just a few moments. I wanted to just kind of zero in on, again, reminding you about tomorrow night and how important this is. I really don't know how to convey adequately or effectively my passion for you to be there tomorrow night. We need the support of each other on this issue of saving babies. And so tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, First Baptist Church will be the commemoration of the 42nd anniversary of the decision of Roe versus Wade in Jackson County, and it'll be held at the First Baptist Church. So come on out, would you? Come on out and be there. It's indoors, it's in the evening, after work, warm, and should be okay. All right, let's go to our special guest today, Toby Harnden, who's with us today. And he's a dual British and American citizen. That means he's somewhat happy. Hi, Toby, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. I'm doubly happy. Doubly happy.
Okay. We're doing a little kind of a mixed version here of Skype and cell phone. Exciting book. Tell us what led you to take this on.
Sure. Well, it was the tragedy, really. I mean, a friend of mine who I've known since the late 1990s, Rupert Thornelow. I first got to know him when he was a young Army intelligence officer, captain. He'd risen to be a lieutenant colonel and in command of his regiment, the Welsh Guards. And he was killed in action in Helmand, southern Afghanistan, on July the 1st, 2009. And I was over here in the States, and I knew he was out there, and I knew that they were in the midst of a bloody fight. But he was the first commanding officer of a battalion, British battalion, killed in action since 1982, the Falklands War. So I thought, oh my goodness, you know, what on earth is going on out there? And that's what led me to go out there and to beg with the Welsh Guards, and that's what led to Dead Men Rising.
You know, Toby, last night the president, in his State of the Union address, got up and said, well, the war in Afghanistan is over. And what struck me deep in my heart was, if we're not careful, all this gets quickly swept under the rug. And we forget those who lost their lives, who gave their all to help a country and to keep us free and safe. What's your thinking on that?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the problem with American presidents or British prime ministers or politicians in the West declaring an end to wars is that the enemy also has a vote. And in a sense, we've seen this movie before. We saw in Iraq. You know, I spent a lot of time embedded with American troops in places like Fallujah, Ramadi, Mosul. All those places are under the control of ISIS at the moment, a sort of radical Islamist group that heads American and British journalists and aid workers. And we declared victory. President Obama declared victory at the end of 2011. We left with no troops. Now in Afghanistan, similar thing. I mean, southern Afghanistan, Helmand province, where so much British and American blood and treasure was spilt. There are no troops there anymore, and the Taliban is moving into the void. And who knows what other groups might use that sort of ungoverned space. We've got 10,000 NATO troops in Afghanistan, going down to 5,000, a tiny number, almost really a force protection unit in a year's time. So I think it's a very dangerous period, and unfortunately, we can't end wars unilaterally. The enemy does have a say in this, and the Taliban has made it clear that they fight on.
Again, there's so much wrapped up by just saying it's over and swept under the carpet and hope it goes away and we never remember it. Does away with one of the core themes of your book, and that's honor, valor, and patriotism. I think we forget that there were some real patriots fighting over there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what I found when I got out there on the ground with the Welsh Guards, and there were U.S. Marines as well fighting alongside them, was that these troops certainly the British troops were very seriously under-equipped, and they were undermanned, so they didn't have the equipment or the manpower that they needed to achieve the mission. And this was the period in 2009 when we were waiting for President Obama to respond to General McChrystal's request for a surge of 40,000 troops. Now, President Obama, at the end of 2009, he announced a surge of 30,000 troops, so he didn't give the general the troops he'd asked for. But sort of crucially, at the same time, he announced that he announced a timetable for withdrawal. So that sent a signal to the Taliban that we weren't in it for the long haul. It sent a signal to ordinary Afghans that you couldn't count on American and British forces, and that, I think, the mission slipped away from the United States and Britain at that point, because it was then operating on a political timetable set in Washington and London, rather than a sort of timetable, a sort of war timetable where the facts on the ground, dictated the military strategy.
The book is titled Dead Men Risen, the epic story of war and heroism in Afghanistan. By the way, it's put out by Rigneri History Books Publishing. You may want to check that out, especially online or at Barnes & Noble. Picture there on the screen. Toby, how would you describe what we hear about? Maybe some would know more about it, but how would you describe the mental anguish that stems from witnessing your fellow soldiers from the suffering and the pain and the gruesomeness that they experience in war?
Yeah, well, this is something I hadn't fully expected to see and to sort of experience. I mean, one phenomenon I hadn't come across or even really heard about was battle shock. And what that is different from PTSD, although it can be linked to sort of subsequent PTSD. That's when you get troops who, their sort of well of courage is empty almost, that they fought incredibly bravely, but for a period they can't take it anymore. And you had young soldiers going into a state of sort of freezing panic, or vomiting before patrols, or sometimes just ripping off their body armor and sort of walking away, putting themselves into incredible danger. But the saddest aspect of the story, I mean, there's incredible tales of heroism and courage and valor and comradeship, but as well as the people who lost their lives and the people who lost limbs, there were invisible wounds they came back with. And there was one guy in particular, Lance Sergeant Dan Collins, who's one of the many heroes in the book, who fought with incredible bravery. I mean, he was a lion. He never faltered, and he led his men into battle. And he was shot in the back in his body armor, knocked off his feet. He was twice blown up by IEDs, and never, he had the option to go home and didn't. He decided to fight on. And when he came back, I first talked to him when he first came back. He seemed to me to be on top of the world. I was almost sort of jealous of him. This young guy who sort of proved himself in combat. But Dan sank into depths of despair. I mean, he had nightmares about the eyes of the soldier who had died in his arms. He kept on seeing these eyes in his nightmares. He had a comrade, Lance Corporal Dane Nelson, who died, blown to pieces, and he helped, put the body parts into the helicopter and continue with the battle. And Dan, he hanged himself on New Year's Day in 2012 in a remote quarry, and he recorded a video to his family just saying, I don't like the person I've become. I want a military funeral, but I can't live. And he wasn't the only casualty after coming back. Another hero, a guy who'd fought in the Falklands War and was in his 50s, basically drank himself to death when he got back. So, yes, I mean, these invisible wounds stay with troops when they come back. And we've seen it I saw the wonderful movie American Sniper yesterday, which to me is the first movie that really portrays what PTSD is like, and these flashbacks, this hypervigilance. And that was certainly something that the troops that I were with experienced and continue to experience.
Wow. I have a hard time processing that, but it just explains the camaraderie that you soldiers have that we just don't understand. We just can't get our head around it.
Right. And what I wanted to do with this book was portray the reality of war. The triumph, the humor, the sense of comradeship, the sense of pride in doing something you've been trained for and fighting for your country in combat. I mean, that's something my grandfather did in the Second World War. My great-grandfather did in the First World War. And so in many ways, it's sort of the peak of someone's life, a soldier's life. And certainly Rupert Thornlow, my friend who was killed, I don't think he would have been, he would have wanted to be anywhere else or doing anything else other than what he was doing. But there are downsides for individuals and for nations. I mean, there is a cost. I mean, there's this expression that can get thrown around: freedom isn't free. Well, for these soldiers, it wasn't free. I mean, they gave a tremendous amount. I mean, they gained a lot from being in the army. Everybody who came back from Afghanistan and Iraq has changed, and in many ways for the better. These are people who've coped with tremendous things, and I think once you've done that, in a way, you can cope with anything. But there are problems, and there's help that's needed, and stigma about mental conditions and PTSD that needs to be reduced. And it's something that, as a society, we need to be aware of, and we need to help veterans deal with.
Toby, again, back to the president's announcement that the war in Afghanistan is over and the withdrawal is there, but we're still leaving, I think, 15,000 troops there. This provokes two questions. One, is our withdrawal a form of surrender? And two, those who remain there, are they in increased danger?
Great question. I think it's currently 10,000 troops, and that'll draw down to 5,000 troops. It's, President Obama used the term yesterday, turning the page. And it's almost like, as a nation, or certainly as a White House, as a president, we just want to put that in the past. The problem is that, as you say, there are troops out there whose lives are still in danger. And certainly, more troops means more protection. And yes, they may not be going out on combat missions, but they're still very, very vulnerable. And I do think, surrender is a very strong word, but it may be, it's certainly arguably appropriate in cases like this where you decide that you don't want to pay the political price, maybe pay the human price. You feel that the population is war weary, and you just decide that's it. We haven't won. We haven't achieved what we wanted to do. We haven't defeated the Taliban, but we're just going to end it, and we're going to kind of say we won. And I think sadly that's the situation we're in at the moment.
You were granted unusual access, to the guardsmen, and I would assume you got more information that you thought you would get.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I first got out there, I went round all the outposts with the troops. I walked the same ground as them. I interviewed them sort of on site. And there was one publisher that wanted me to write the book very, very quickly. And I'm glad I didn't do that, because going to visit them once they'd gone back and talk to them in their base in Aldershot and in their homes in Wales, and getting to know them over the months and years, really, I got more and more, and people's perspectives changed. And also, I was able to get access to, thousands of documents, almost every document that the battalion had produced, and up to the brigade level, and emails from Rupert Thornlow, my friend who'd been killed, a diary of Lieutenant Mark Everson, who's the platoon commander, emails home from Major Sean Birchall, who was the company commander, who was killed. So I was able to put together an incredibly sort of detailed, sort of granular picture of what happened, both from testimony and people's memories, but also the sort of the radio log, the incident log, the incident reports. So I was able to cross-reference it and build up a picture that was, as close to being absolutely accurate as I think you could get.
I commend you on doing this, because in some ways it's a eulogy, in some ways it's a reminder, in some ways it is a clear illustration of what that war was all about, what it is about over there. And if we're not careful with this fast, high-paced life that we live with digital devices and everything else, we won't have any respect of what went on over there. So your book kind of capsulates all that, and I want to commend you for that. What's the essence? What do you want people to get from this, Toby?
I want people to realize that this is what troops go through. And again, American Sniper, it shows that war is hell, that it's horrible, dirty stuff with you have to take incredibly difficult decisions, and you're put in a position that no one would ever want to be put into. So I want people to understand that it's not just, you deploy troops and then you just forget about it and then someone get killed and they come back. There is a cost, there is a price to pay. And also, you made a good point that this should be a reminder as well as a eulogy. I don't want it to just be something that looks back. I want it to be a reminder to governments and to voters, populations, that if you send somebody to do something, if you send troops out to try and achieve a mission, you need to give the mission needs to be clear, the strategy needs to be coherent, and you need to give them what they need to succeed. Because sadly, in many aspects of the Afghanistan conflict, and these are highlighted in Dead Men, we didn't give them what they needed.
Wow, so very true. I think we sit home in our living rooms and we watch it on the evening news. And there's one thing about war I think we forget, and you can comment on this, but there are no rules in war. We get into war with some ethical framework, but the enemy has no ethical framework and no rules. It's just we can't get our head around that.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's absolutely right. The thing is, we have rules. We have things called the rules of engagement. Certainly during this period, we had a thing that was called courageous restraint. It was what the British called it, but it was actually a new policy of accepting more risk for yourself, like soldiers and Marines potentially getting killed to avoid civilian casualties, which is a hell of a thing to ask troops to do. And there was a lot of pushback about that. But certainly, there were snipers that I spoke to, and the rules of engagement were if you had a military-age male who was carrying a weapon, you could shoot him. If you saw him with a weapon and then he dropped it and then he walked out the other side of a bush, you couldn't shoot him. And those are the kind of rules we were operating under. But of course, the Taliban doesn't have those rules, and we saw in American Sniper about the use of women and children to carry out attacks, putting troops in the position of having to shoot them and then having to live with that decision for the rest of their lives afterwards. So yes, it's asymmetric warfare is the sort of term. It's unbalanced. We're Western democracies. We have values that certainly the Taliban and other Islamist groups around the world, they're not the values that they don't share those values.
Wow. Well, Toby, thank you. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your rolling with us on our technical challenges today. Let me encourage you. It's called Dead Man Rising, an epic story of war and heroism in Afghanistan. There's a picture on the screen put out by Rigney History Books. Get a copy of it. And let's, again, have a great appreciation, understanding, and empathy for those, and many of them, who gave their all that we may remain free. Thank you, Toby. Blessings on you, my friend.
Okay.
Let's stay connected.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. We'll be right back.